Thank you. We have two work session items tonight. The first one is related to tax increment financing, which is an economic development tool that the state of Ohio provides. And with us tonight is Greg Daniels. He's our TIF counsel with Squire Patton Boggs, and he's one of the leading experts as it relates to TIF and the various economic development tools in the state of Ohio. And then also our assistant finance director, Nikki Weber. I'll turn it over to Greg and Nikki.
Good evening. Is this working? Great. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Commission members, very happy to be here this evening. I have a couple PowerPoint slides to run through with you here for a very high-level presentation. But please, if you have questions, stop, interrupt me. I'm happy to get as deep into the topic of TIFs as you want to get. I live, breathe, work on these every day. I'm sure that sounds very exciting. I'm excited about it. I'm happy to share that excitement with all of you. Just from an overview, in terms of what a TIF is, why we worry about it at all, why do we deal with it? As Brian said, it is an economic development tool. In my mind, it's one of the key economic development tools we have here in the state of Ohio. And in fact, we're one of 49 total states across the country that utilize TIFs as a major part of their economic development programs. So it's very, very important. In Ohio, we use it for a number of purposes. Job creation is by far the number one use, putting TIF money into projects and usually the infrastructure associated with projects that's necessary to create the jobs that we as communities are all after. Also, and increasingly important, is using TIFs to help support housing. I think if you talk to Brian, you talk to your economic development staff, really, I've had conversations with the director of development of the state of Ohio. Everyone is starting to understand the importance of having a good housing stock that has housing opportunities for all income levels in order to be able to house the people once we get the jobs that we're all after. And finally, and this is, I put it in third place as a use of TIF, but cities do sometimes use TIF strategically, not for individual projects, but to, in essence, create a war chest to undertake the major infrastructure projects they know they're going to need to undertake in order to set the stage for their job creation specific projects or their housing specific projects. So TIF as a tool can generate the revenue necessary for those three major goals, and there's a lot of minor goals that sometimes come up for these. TIF specifically redirects new property taxes from new developments to fund capital improvement costs. And I want to emphasize that it's new property taxes. The current tax base, whenever we put a TIF into effect, is untouched. So we're not taking current taxes away from any taxing subdivision when we do a TIF. It's all about the prospective new taxes. The second point here is it's for capital costs, not operation and maintenance costs. TIF is not a tool to solve, year-to-year operational issues for a city, or counties and townships can also do TIFs. It is to fund long-term capital improvements, which, as defined in the Ohio Revised Code, have a useful life of at least 5 years. But most of the time, and I'll get into this a little bit later, we're doing things that have a 20, 25, 30-year useful life. So these are funding improvements that are going to be in the community for a long period of time, rather than funding short-term operational deficits. And the final big picture point I want to make about TIF is this idea of a but-for test. And there is not an official test in Ohio that says in order by law to be able to do a TIF, you have to be able to demonstrate that the project would not happen without the TIF. But I can tell you, in working with virtually all of my clients, that is a major common sense test that they use when deciding whether or not to implement a TIF for a project. Will this project happen? Can we build the infrastructure necessary without a TIF? A lot of times the answer is no. And that's when we do a TIF. If the answer is yes, most of the time we won't do the TIF. So that is, again, that's not a legal test, but a common sense test that gets discussed in virtually every TIF that I do. And it's really all about funding the gap for projects. I don't know if you've heard developers talk about this or companies talk about this in their presentations to you, but I'd say the smart ones, the ones who know how to ask for public support, know how to identify the gap in their project fund. To say, hey, we have a real need. We're not asking for this TIF support or for the city to fund infrastructure just to increase our bottom line. It's a necessity for the project. We have a real gap that we need to solve. So that's a high-level overview. Now getting a little bit into the specifics of what TIFs look like in Ohio, and specifically the TIFs that we deal with as a city. The basic maximum TIF term in Ohio is 30 years, and you can have up to 100% of the new taxes basically TIF or diverted into a TIF fund. For a few larger TIFs, we can extend that by up to another 30 years, although I can tell you that's pretty rare. First, it's pretty rare to have a TIF big enough. Because you have to be generating at least $1.5 million a year of TIF revenue. The vast majority do not. But for your mega projects, this can be really handy to help finance the really big infrastructures. But by and large, and I think at this point, every TIF this city has done has been a maximum of 30 years and generally around the 100%. The property taxes and the new property taxes get diverted into what is called a TIF fund. And we have been in the practice of setting up a separate TIF fund for every TIF that is adopted by this commission to keep track of the TIF revenue. We are in some cases allowed to pool it. We generally have not done that. But once the money goes into the TIF fund, it can be used essentially for two things, with some exceptions for a couple other things. The main two things are to fund the actual capital costs that I previously discussed. Those are mostly what are called public infrastructure improvements. That's a statutorily defined term. There are a couple TIF programs where we can fund private improvements. We don't use those very much, but sometimes it comes in handy, specifically for urban redevelopment projects or job creation projects. The other major thing that we do with the TIF money is compensate the school districts. That's both the city school district and where we have overlapping joint vocational school districts. They get the same deal on compensation at a rateable level as the city school district. Most of the TIFs we do are what are called non-school TIFs, where the school district gets fully compensated. There are a few that are called school TIFs, where there's a share of the new taxes generated by school millage that go into the TIF fund. Those tend to be the exception rather than the rule, but we do that sometimes to fill the gap, make the economic. For one kind of really now two types of TIFs that I'll get into in a minute, for residential incentive districts and downtown development district TIFs, there's also some county compensation potentially. So this is a pie chart that I like to show that helps illustrate what is going on with the TIF revenue. On the left is the general distribution of tax revenues. The school district is generally, it's that big piece of the pie with county levies, other taxing districts, the city, the joint vocational district, those smaller pieces of the pie. When you have a non-school TIF, everything but the two school districts normally get diverted into the TIF fund. So if you look at the chart on the right, that's the blue. For a non-school TIF, again, we are fully compensating the school district and the joint vocational school district. It's those, the purple and the red pie. They're getting the same proportion that they otherwise would have. Where we do these special school TIFs that I'm talking about, that is a negotiation with the school district over needing some of the red and the purple to make the project work. In other words, if the gap's too big for the blue, then we need to go talk to the school district to make sure we can balance our numbers. So that's just a graphical depiction of the split of taxes that we normally have. And this is specifically for the conversations with the school district. Just a very short TIF of 10 years or 75%. We can do those TIFs without any engagement with the school district. We do those occasionally. I think those are more of the exception for particular projects rather than the rule. Exemptions over 75% or over a 10-year term, we need school district approval. The big exception to that is where we completely compensate, in which case we do not approve. So as you might see TIFs come before you from time to time, just to reemphasize that you might hear them described as a non-school TIF, where the school districts get fully compensated. We do not need any sort of school district approval or sign-off because they're held harmless. Or a school TIF, the less common case, where we need that extra money to make the project work, but we're engaging in conversations with the school. So that's the two basic flavors of TIFs in Ohio. I'm not going to go through all the categories here, but I did want to illustrate for you the four major ways we implement TIFs. There's, at this point, at least 8 separate statutes in Ohio under which we can implement a TIF. We usually use 3 of them. I put the downtown redevelopment districts on this slide just to make you aware. We don't typically use that, but we have been talking about more and more downtown redevelopment projects. So that is out there as an option. The 3 major sorts of TIFs that we use are what are called commercial or parcel TIF. That's pretty much as it sounds. You have individual parcels and an individual commercial project, and you typically are engaging with the developer who illustrates the gap for their particular project. Maybe it's infrastructure requirements the city has. Maybe it's environmental remediation or something is wrong with the site, but we still want to encourage the project, get the jobs. We'll do a TIF on that individual parcel, or maybe there's 3 or 4 parcels, and we'll put that in a TIF to fund that specific project. The special municipal TIF under Section 570941 is specifically for urban redevelopment projects. They can be used for both public infrastructure improvements, and they can actually fund the private project. That's one of the few TIFs that can actually fund a private project. So that's the second type. The third type, and this is something that we've done in the past couple years, and it's, I believe, on your agenda again tonight, is something called a residential incentive district TIF. That's the type of TIF where we can TIF single-family housing and help that money be used to build the infrastructure necessary for that housing. Downtown redevelopment districts are relatively new. They don't get used very often because your maximum is 70% of the improvement value, but they can do some really interesting things if you have a loan program for tech or historic revitalization or building revitalization. Not a lot of cities have done that, but it's something that more and more are talking about potentially doing as part of their downtown revitalization. And again, this is a list of public infrastructure improvements I wanted to provide for you. Most of them are traditional. The 2 things that I'd like to highlight is you can do environmental remediation and demolition, which can be really valuable, again, for your downtown revitalization efforts. And a relatively new feature is off-street parking facilities. This is not just public off-street parking facilities. It can also have private reserve spots. And the reason for that is you do these projects, and a lot of times the office tenant will want private reserve spots in order to attract those jobs. So that was just an amendment the General Assembly did last year. I think that's it for the quick fly through of TIF law and an overview. Certainly you have these slides now if you have questions, but any questions at this point?
Any questions from the comment? We have as one of our goals, you may not be aware of this, the use of not only TIFs, but other measures like CRA and others to encourage housing development and economic. And I think it would be fair to say, given what's going on in our community right, given the number of job opportunities that now are in Springfield, and given the housing that's just booming in this community right now, that those efforts on our part have certainly contributed to the welfare of this community. Certainly won't go so far as to say that they were exclusively responsible. That would not be accurate. But we've had a lot of people involved, and these certainly have helped both in the area of economic development and housing to take us from a community where we were losing population and where jobs had left Springfield to a community now that is gaining in population and where jobs are plentiful. And I'm glad that we made use of these tools in that effort, and thank you very much for that presentation. I hope the public certainly has a much better understanding of how these can be used to move a city forward.
Just asking a basic question. This is something that a lot of residents around the entire community want to know. Like, have you watched or been involved with cities who are working with development, large development groups? Have they literally walked away from cities when TIFs are not presented or not even, considered?
I think walking away is probably the wrong term. If a TIF is not offered in some circumstances and it gets down to that gap analysis I was talking about, if they just can't make the economic work, they'll shelve the project, or they'll walk away from the purchase option they have on a piece of property that they might want to develop.
And then you said earlier, I think in the beginning, that TIFs are widely used throughout the state of Ohio. I know these are simple, but these are simple to you, but when people hear the word TIF, they have their own opinion about it. That's why you have a job. But it just TIFs are so mysterious that's why one of the reasons why I asked the mayor if we would have a work session to just have a very simple, as you said, high level view of this. I know people can look on the site. I'd like if you could share your presentation or email it to me and maybe the associates. We look at that again, but to find more information out, can they go to that website, or is there a website you can offer that actually even speaks even clearer about TIFs in the state of Ohio?
The Department of Development website does have a lot of, I'd say, more detailed, maybe even more practitioner-oriented TIF information. So if they want to take a deeper dive, they can look there in addition to the revised code. But I think Nikki now has my presentation, so we can easily share it, and you can certainly put it up on the city's website if you like.
Helpful.
And I was going to suggest that, commissioners, is we'll take the information. I can put the link to the Department of Development's site, but also the presentation, and have that on our main homepage of our website. So if people are interested in learning more about beyond just tonight's presentation, but a deeper dive into TIFs, we can make that available.
Yeah, I just think as a good county partner, as the city is, that we would do the best we can to inform all the residents that are affected by these things, whether they get to vote on our decision or not. They would understand that we would make an effort, right, wrong, or indifferent, that you can learn more about this and as we're looking and contemplating these serious decisions. Thank you.
Other question?
But I don't know exactly how to ask.
Yeah.
I'm going to use a specific situation. I want to talk residential for a moment.
Mike.
And when a TIF is established for a residential project, and those taxes are going to be taken away from the school. You're not what was there before the new project to be, but the taxes, new development, new improvement will be deferred to schools if there's no agreement made, whatever. What is the rate as far as the taxes on a new development as a TIF and the taxes, the new development property owner, are they going to pay more if there's a TIF involved, but it's not going necessarily to the county or the city, it's going to infrastructure. The city wouldn't have put in unless a TIF was given or the developer. That's how it usually was. We're talking development. Well, how does that equate to where the schools aren't being penalized?
So,
Did I ask that right?
I think I got 2 or 3 questions asked correctly
Okay.
there. So let me start with your tax question about the tax rates the property owners pay. A property owner pays exactly the same amount, either if their TIF property is TIF or it is not. There is zero difference in what they pay. It just shows up on a different line item on their tax bill and gets moved into a different fund. But from a property owner perspective, they don't, same amount. You raised the point about the school districts. Again, there's 2 main flavors of TIFs. There's the school TIF, where we are diverting some of the school money to pay for the infrastructure. I'll get back to the necessity and what might have changed in recent years to make that sometimes necessary. And non-school TIFs. I would say if you look across Ohio, and I don't think we're any different in this city, in general, probably 4 out of every 5 TIFs are a non-school TIF, where the school districts are held completely harmless. They're getting all of their money passed back through to them. So they, for them, just like the taxpayers, they don't really care if there's a TIF there or not. So I think your third question really focused on that but-for test and gap analysis that I was talking about. As from an industry perspective, what we've been seeing in recent years is the cost of infrastructure has been going up in a way that the home builders for a residential development can't finance all the infrastructure. They can't fit it within the home prices that they want to offer to the market. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, really, it's because we're getting increasingly far out in terms of the building by necessity. The closer property already served by infrastructure has been developed for housing. We're going out in cornfields now where there's not adequate infrastructure. We need water, we need sewer, we need roads to get there. A lot of the time, the home builders, especially for higher priced homes, have no problem handling all the infrastructure within their subdivisions. That's the traditional model you're thinking. But the issue is getting the infrastructure out there. And if it is a lower price point community, those margins aren't there for the developers on their sale prices. So there's a gap. They can't pay for it all. And that's when they come to, cities, counties, townships, asking for this TIF help to build that infrastructure to fill that gap.
And Greg, maybe it would be helpful to use the current example that our commission's familiar with, which is Bridgewater, which is our current TIF that's in operation or collecting revenue, and explain how that works as it relates to the school side and the non-school side.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Bridgewater development, they had a big, heavy infrastructure lift for that project. they had a gap that they illustrated to the city administration. Um, just given the amount of infrastructure they needed to build in those previously undeveloped areas. After running the numbers, and again, it's always a matter of matching the revenue and your revenue needs to this gap on the infrastructure side. What we all realized, both the developer and the city administration, is we needed to do a hybrid of a school TIF and a non-school TIF. So what happened is during the first 10 years, 75% of all of the taxes, including the school taxes, go into the TIF fund to really jumpstart the funding of the infrastructure. The remaining 25% get distributed as normal, including to the school district and the county and the countywide agencies. That gives us more money up front to efficiently pay for the infrastructure and plug that.
And these are new tax.
These are entirely new taxes.
Okay, so nobody's losing what they had.
There is nothing lost, and there would have been no new taxes because there really was a gap for the project. It would not have moved forward without this mechanism to pay for the infrastructure.
When you talk about 100%, you mentioned you're talking 100% the new tax.
It is always new
25%,
taxes.
The other taxes, there exist, whether it's cornfield or still going to be collected
Mhm.
and distributed like it was before.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah. And in
That's
Bridge,
important.
it is important. And then I would say the hidden benefit to the other taxing subdivisions, including the schools, is when you have a piece of property like Bridgewater that's taxed at an agricultural level, it jumps from agricultural taxes, which are very low. I mean, you're maybe getting a couple $100 an acre, to a regular valuation, which is many times the many multiples of the agricultural taxes. That switch from the agricultural taxation to residential or commercial taxation, because the value is already there, that doesn't get captured by the TIF. So as soon as a piece of property stops being farmed, there is an immediate boost in taxes for everyone that's not captured by the TIF. So you get that. And again, in Bridgewater's case, for the first 10 years, everyone gets an additional 25% of the new taxes that never would have been there if the infrastructure couldn't have been built, if the gap wasn't addressed. For the last 20 years, it shifts over to the non-school TIF. So, and the theory there being 10 years from now, there's probably going to be some more families there. It's going to be built out. There's going to be more students for the school district to deal with once it's fully built out. So starting in year 11, the school district gets its full share of taxes.
Yeah.
New money, new taxes.
So the Bridgewater is currently a hybrid TIF.
It is currently a hybrid TIF. That's correct.
Okay. So during the presentation, there wasn't much talked about the hybrid version. So how often is that? Because you said that the school TIF, right, with the 75% isn't that often, right? It's rare. So with the hybrid, how it sounds more advantageous to me to do them all like a hybrid, right? I mean, so why is that not more often used? And what do you think is the percentage of the hybrid model?
I'd say the hybrid TIFs are probably less than 5% of the total TIFs. Again, it varies place to place. But, for example, in a city like Cincinnati, they have a standing agreement with their school district where out of the total pot for all 30 years, the TIF gets 65% and the school district gets 35%. Those are school TIFs. It was just simpler for them to set up their TIFs like that. And then they revisit that agreement every few years to see how they're doing in terms of development.
So with our TIF, our current TIF, do we have the opportunity to revisit it? And how often do we have that?
For Bridgewater, we really don't have the opportunity to revisit that one unless we need to go ask the school districts for more money, which we do not anticipate needing that believe we have the gap addressed, we can leave that as is.
So point of clarity, you said that, for example, the city of Cincinnati or whatever they have a blanket agreement.
Yes.
So that's what they revisit.
Yes.
We
Yeah,
address.
I'm sorry, you're
We
correct.
address each individual project differently.
Versus
So
that blanket.
each one is looked at differently and what
Okay,
that
got you.
TIF's needs are.
So that's why
That's
not
why it's revisited.
Yeah,
Okay,
yes.
but that blanket model is the
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
for I got you. Thank you,
Yep.
Rob.
That's exactly right, yes.
Any other questions from the commissioner? Motion to,
We got one more work session. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Nikki. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Very informational.
Our next item on the work session agenda is our Solid Waste District Annual Report. And with us tonight is Chuck Bauer and Bonnie Martins.
Thank you. We do have a presentation. I'll get it. You get it. I'm Chuck Bauer. I'm the director of the Clark County Solid Waste District, and thank you for allowing us some time tonight to report on last year's activities. We try to come to the city every year to present and let you know what the Solid Waste District's been up to, and that we're still here and serving the community of Clark County, and Springfield's a big part of our district, of course. I think everyone has a copy of the report. The outline for what we wanted to talk about today, and this is Bonnie Martins with me today too. I should introduce you. I know that I think you did already. Thank you, Brian. So we wanted to talk about the Solid Waste District background for those that may not be familiar with us. Talk about some of the contracts that we have. So we have a contract with the Sheriff's Department and the Health District. One of the big services that we provide is specialty recycling within the community. We'll talk about that a little bit. We have drop-off recycling stations that we operate throughout the county, and we have a couple in the city. We do a lot of education work, community engagement, and we'll talk through some numbers for last year, and then, of course, have time for questions. Please interrupt me anytime that you'd like to go through. There we go. So, as I mentioned, we are a county agency. Our mission is to make sure that Clark County residents and businesses have comprehensive solid waste services, access to those services. And a big other part of our mission is to provide environmental education throughout the entire county and talk about waste and reduction program services. So, our staff is made up of myself. I'm part-time director. Bonnie Martins is our program manager. She's full-time. We have Sam Perrin is a program specialist. He does a lot of our education work. And John Hoy is our recycling facility manager. He runs facilities for us. We also have some other operations workers that help, and you can see a couple of them up there, right there. Sean and Mick, Mitt, and Dakota Key all help with part-time at the facility with our operations. And I mentioned before, we do have some contracts with the Sheriff's Office that provides us access to environmental deputies, and also gives us access to the inmates for our Pride crew. So they help out with a lot of labor throughout the community. And we also have a contract with the Combined Health District. The contract with the Health District has a lot of services kind of bundled into it. So there's a lot of funding that goes to individuals that work at the health district. They inspect trash trucks, composting facilities within community, and these are the numbers for last year that they looked at. Salvage yards, we have 2 C&D landfills that they help with inspection work. Scrap tire dealers throughout the community, they're working to inspect those and work with those facilities. They also take complaints from the community. You can see how many they had last year. They do inspection work, send out warning letters, and board orders when appropriate. So that's what the numbers look like for last year. These are Deputies Bennett and Tillman. They're the 2 sheriff environmental enforcement deputies that work with solid waste district. They have two components. One is the solid waste district takes a lot of calls related to illegal dumping within the county and the city. Last year, you see how many calls we had that came in. Bonnie and other staff will take those calls. We write up reports, and then we communicate that information with Deputies Tillman and Bennett. They actually come to our offices every day, or just about every day, and they'll work those calls that come in. They also go and will take inmates with the Pride crew and do cleanup when appropriate, and when it's in a public space to help clean up the materials, to do investigations. And occasionally they are able to arrest people that are doing the illegal dump. I mentioned the Pride inmate program. So inmates from the county jail are eligible to come out of the jail every day and work and provide service back to the community. So you can see some of the inmates there. They bale cardboard. They do cleanups. And they'll do lots of service within the community, and the environmental enforcement deputies provide that access. So last year, you can see they picked up almost 160 tons of trash. They did almost 7,300 hours of service to the. So it's a really valuable program as far as having labor come to the solid waste. Specialty recycling is every Thursday and the first Saturday. And you can see the sign up there. It's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every Thursday, first Saturday, 9 to noon. And this is where community members can bring in household hazardous waste, tires, paint, electronic things, kind of anything like that. You can see pictures up there of what we're bringing in during that time. And are able to either get those materials properly disposed of or recycled during this program time. So last year we had almost 60 tons of electronics that came through that facility, 28 tons of paint, and a little over 7 tons of household hazardous waste. And every year we've kind of increased the number of customers that came through. We had over 2,900 customers, paying customers that came through. There's a lot of things that we don't actually charge. Some electronics don't charge. We had actually probably over 2,000 customers. A new program that we piloted last year and we're continuing is a furniture drop program. So the second Tuesday of each month, with appointment from 9 to 2, residents can bring, of the county or solid waste district, can bring bulky items to our facility at 1620 West Main Street. And we have kind of a small fee. So large items, $10, small items, $5, all right? And kind of we define the size with that 4x4 foot kind of shape. If it's bigger than that, then it's a large item. So we did have 300 people come through last year. We took in over 7 tons of furniture. 150 customers came through. So we identified last year that disposing of bulky items in the community is an issue, and we wanted to try to do what we can to provide some access. So we're continuing the program. It's been, I think, successful. We want to expand hours, but staffing has for everyone in the community right now has been trouble. People that fill the gap to be able to expand hours. Another program that I just wanted to mention that we took on last year and supported in the community is a contract with CNS Recycling Service Center, or Recycling Center. In 2020, CNS started charging for residents to bring green waste, any kind of brush, leaves.
Trees.
So we found out about that, and that we also saw an uptick in illegal dumping of brush material in the community. So we went to CNS as a solid waste district and asked if we could contract with them, establish a contract that would provide basically no charge for our county residents to use their facility to take yard waste to them. And we entered into that contract. We're still in that contract right now. You can see the numbers from last year. as far as a lot of material went through that facility, and we're helping facilitate that. I'll mention also that any municipality or public entity can also go and use that facility at no charge as part of that contract. So it's a big component. Yard waste recycling in our community is a big component of how we meet our recycling goals. I'll let Bonnie talk about our education.
Sam has gone into the schools to do programs that revolve around anti-litter, recycling, sustainability programs, anything that matches with our solid waste district plan. He has geared the K through 12 programs to meet state standards for those particular grade levels. So if he goes into a kindergarten class, he's meeting X, Y, and Z standards, same as if he goes into, say, a sixth grade. They're different programs, of course. In 2021, he also provided some videos as well as social media options for teachers as they were still at the beginning of 2021 virtual. Towards the end of 2021, so fall of this past school year, he was able to get back into classrooms sparingly, 13 classrooms, which allowed him to work with 197 students. The upper left photo that you see was he was able to go into the school. They already had the recycling bin at the school, but the school didn't actually have even a paper recycling program. And this particular student talked to his teacher, who reached out to us, and we helped provide paper recycling canisters that you see for each of the classrooms. They created a green team and started the paper recycling, at least in his school. So that was beneficial.
I'll mention that Sam's also there at the Kiwanis Club, so he'll also go to any other kind of group in the community and talk about recycling and the mission of the solid waste district as well. So this year's numbers are much better as far as education. I think Sam said he's already over 1,100 kids that he visited for 2022. Got back, so we're very grateful for that. You go ahead.
In addition to Sam, myself and Sam will go out. We have the Keep Clark County Beautiful board. We meet 6 times a year. You see the Rumpke bin, that's the Memorial Day parade. And as we mentioned, the Pride crew earlier, it's that Pride crew that will go around, get those trash receptacles donated from Rumpke along the parade route. The Pride crew manages them, comes by afterwards, gets them all cleaned up and taken care of.
Yeah, I'll mention we have this partnership with Keep Clark County Beautiful. So they're a nonprofit affiliation with Keep America Beautiful. It's our local affiliation. They're really a great outlet for us to do education and do litter cleanups within the community. You can see the folks in the upper picture there doing some of that cleanup. And actually, we're in Great American Cleanup right now through June 20th. So Solid Waste District provides cleanup materials. You can see the litter picker-uppers, grabbers, bags. So if you want to do a litter cleanup, please contact us. Now's the time. We do it any time of the year, really, but now it's really a focus for Great American. So that's something else Solid Waste District help our education with the community and help clean up that litter.
That went. Sorry for the technical difficulty. This was kind of the slide I thought we were on. Both Sam and myself do many community programs along with other organizations. So our I'm working with a program with a nature camp, doing a recycling project that's combined with National Trails, Parks, and Programs. We do programs, the containers at the bottom are Clearstream frames. You might see these in our Dora district right now. We're tentatively looking at getting that option for the Dora cups. That's the Clearstream frames, but it's not just, say, Summer Arts Festival and the city. Any organization, a church, a family reunion that wants to recycle or needs a trash receptacle for where they're meeting can borrow these for free. So we do get out as much as possible with the public to, again, talk about recycling and reducing waste.
So I mentioned we're going to kind of get into some numbers. We have 6 drop-off recycling locations around the county. You can see the addresses where those are. In Springfield, we're at our main office, which is at West Main Street, 1620 West Main Street, and we have one at Home Road, which is right next to the Springfield High School and the Combined Health District. So last year we had 2,300 dumpsters, those 8-yard dumpsters you can see a picture of there. Those were tipped by, we have a contract with Rumpke, so we had commingled materials go into those dumpsters with mixed recyclables. We also have cardboard-only bins that we service. That's what John does and some of our staff. You can see that's the larger container in the picture. And we had almost 329 tons of cardboard that was collected from those sites last year. One of the main objectives of the main objective of the solid waste district, the county solid waste district, is to implement the state solid waste plan. So the state's goal for residential and commercial recycling is to have a recycling rate greater than 25%. Last year, our county did pretty well. We're always around 40%. We're at 43%, so we're very happy about that. That gives us the freedom to be able to implement our programs without state oversight and kind of them telling us that we have to do certain things. We definitely have some latitude with our programming because we're above that 25% goal. So that equated to about 77,000 tons of material that was recycled. So that we're always a year behind. So that's 2020 data is what we're reporting now, and right now we're getting 2021 data in. So just kind of a note as why the years are always a year behind related to the recycling information. Some more information about our drop-off recycling performance. So that when I showed you that big bin in the picture of the material that's collected at the drop-off site, comes back to our facility. So the Pride inmates, they take that material, put it in a baler, and we bale that material, and then we sell that on the market. So you can see the graphic on the right kind of shows how we've collected paper, tons of recycled commingled material. That's gone up to 736 tons. And then the cardboard number is 329 tons. We've seen a progression over the years. We keep getting a little better every year, which is what we want to see. Some other numbers. So we're funded by 2 mechanisms. One is a generation fee, so $8.50 of every ton of trash that leaves the county and goes to a landfill or a transfer station. $8.50 comes back to fund the programs for the solid waste district. And we also have non-generation fees. So non-generation fee income would be user fees for folks that use the specialty recycling. And we get non-generation fee income from selling the cardboard or metals that people donate to the solid waste district. So you can see kind of the numbers. We almost had $100,000 last year of non-generation fee income. And we're seeing the user fees increase because that specialty recycling is getting used more and more each year. And the blue, the bottom section of this far right column for 2021 is mainly cardboard revenue. So cardboard prices spiked over the last year. So we definitely saw a benefit from that because we're selling that material back into the place. This is a summary of our annual revenue expenses and revenue minus the expenses, kind of where we ended up for 2021. So we brought in just under $975,000 of income, total income. Our expenses were 843, and we had a net positive of 131,000, and our end of year fund balance around $1.3 million in the solid waste district fund. I think that's the last slide that we have right now. Open to questions. Oh, I did want to mention, the solid waste district we work on a 5-year cycle for our solid waste district plan. And this December, we start planning for the next 5-year cycle. So next year is a planning year. So we have a policy committee. Commissioner Estrop is city's representative on that committee. And if the community wants to see a new program come in place within the solid waste district, we need to get it incorporated into that plan that's approved by Ohio EPA. So this coming year would be is the time to do that. So if there's new ideas, now's the time, starting in December next year, that we'll be looking for that and working on the next 5-year plan. With that, I guess, have you any questions? Yeah, any questions?
If you would comment, because you're now taking styrofoam, that's a rather recent development. Tell us a little about that program, because you don't take all styrofoam, but I know we're taking a lot. So would you mind commenting on that?
Bonnie's program. She got a grant for this program a few years.
The grant was through the Ohio EPA. We can accept, it's essentially the packaging material, styrofoam, if you get a new electronic or a put together yourself shelving unit, some sort of where that white styrofoam separates the layers, or the pre-shaped, hold your DVD player in place within the box. If there is kind of a switch to this kind of flexible styrofoam looking like material in some electronics, we cannot take that. No food grade styrofoam. So no styrofoam cups, egg cartons, now the paperboard egg cartons, that's cardboard. But when we're talking the styrofoam program, we cannot accept anything that clean or otherwise that's food related. But that white packaging material or coolers, if you get medicine shipped to you or steaks, we just ask that all tape, labels, stickers, all of that be removed. It just helps the process, because then we have to take them off otherwise. And again, staffing issues. But
yeah, so you ask where. So we do recycle at 1620 West Main Street, and in the lower picture in front of that warehouse, there's a bin. You can kind of see this marked styrofoam that open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can place the rigid styrofoam, so white rigid styrofoam. So I usually if you can take it and snap, that's the kind of stuff we can recycle. What happens is we have a machine that densifies that material. It goes into a big hopper, gets chewed up into bits, and then it basically gets melted. So that's the densification piece. We're densifying it, and then we take that densified material, and we have a company in
Mason.
Cincinnati,
Mason,
Ohio, that will buy that from. So that's what's going on. So we're only taking that material at 1620 West.
I will say, as 2020, at the beginning of that, when we were trying to get this program going, we were going to reach out to businesses, some of the business equipment type companies, furniture companies, cabinet companies, unpackage their products and end up with a lot of that styrofoam. But 2020 kind of changed the course of a lot of those. So we do plan to reach out to companies that might have a lot of styrofoam. We were going to give them bags and then switch out when they bring us 5 large bags or 6 or 7, whatever, that they're comfortable storing. They bring it in, we give them 5 to 7 bags to then fill up on their, for their next trip. That would be the next kind of moving forward step.
I want to thank the two of you for the leadership that you continue to demonstrate in Clark County and in the city of Springfield. As your numbers indicate, we're making some progress. I know we have a way to go, but I want to thank not only you, but the people of Springfield who seem to be pitching in more these days Obviously, the numbers support that, and helping to keep our city cleaner. It's a job that really should involve all of us. So thank you for your leadership.
Anything else from commissioners? Mr. Manager,
That concludes our work session. There are no add-on items tonight, and so we can adjourn this meeting and move to the formal meeting.
is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
We actually do have one public hearing, so.
Yes. The public hearing scheduled for 6:55 is called to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes. The purpose of this meeting is for a public hearing to consider a right-of-way vacation as proper legal notice been given of the hearing.
Notice was published in the Springfield News and Sun, a newspaper of general circulation within the city, advertising the city commission's consideration of vacating the first alley east of Clifton Avenue from East Lansdowne Avenue to East Auburn Avenue, and the first alley north of East Lansdowne Avenue from Clifton Avenue to Ontario Avenue. Attached here too are true and correct copies of the notices of public hearing published on May 2nd and May 9, 2022.
I move that the communication be ordered, received, recorded in the minutes, and filed.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes. Staff report.
Applicant is requesting to vacate the alleyways shown on the slide. For proposed residential development, the parcel was approved for rezoning from commercial to residential use by City Commission on May 10th. This year, return reports from utility companies state no objections, recommend approval. Return reports from city staff state no objections and recommend approval. The request to vacate alleyways was approved unanimously at the planning board meeting. There were no objections received from public and at the planning board meeting. Thank you.
There a motion to order communication and notice received, ordered in minutes and filed. Did that, okay. Well, I got the staff report. So now, any member of the commission want to ask a question? Anyone in the audience want to speak to this matter? Motion to adjourn the hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Then move and seconded. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes. The city commission meeting called to order. I would like to ask us for some moments of silence in memory of those who died in Texas this afternoon. Thank you. So we've already done the public hearing, right? So it's now time to call the order. Roll
Dr.
call.
I'm sorry. Roll call for this meeting?
Yeah.
Dr. Estra?
Here.
Mr. O'Neill?
Here.
Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Rue?
Here.
Mr. Copeland?
Here. Please rise for the invocation, Pledge of Allegiance. Oh God, we're grateful for the opportunity to act on behalf of the people of Springfield. Our hearts break for those who are suffering from the events of the afternoon. We ask you to be with them. In your name we pray.
Flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes. Clerk will proceed with first reading of ordinance by title only.
Vacating the first alley east of Clifton Avenue from East Lansdowne Avenue to East Auburn Avenue, and the first alley north of East Lansdowne Avenue from Clifton Avenue to Ontario Avenue. Creating the Sycamore Ridge Tax Increment Financing Incentive District, declaring improvements to the parcels within each incentive district to be a public purpose and exempt from real property taxation, requiring the owners of those parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements that benefit or serve parcels in the incentive district, and providing for compensation payments. Authorizing the city manager to enter into a listing and marketing commission agreement with Brindley Mountain Fire Apparatus for the disposal of a 2001 Emergency 1 fire truck as property not needed for municipal purposes pursuant to Section 149.03B of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Springfield, Ohio. Confirming and approving the acceptance of a donation from Select Tech Services Corporation, doing business as Select Tech, of a Hobart ground power unit model 6T28400GI with an approximate value of $6,638.02.
Any questions or comments on first readings?
Yes, I do. I was asked, Brian, if you could speak in light of some of the education we just had on TIFs, if you could speak to this Sycamore Ridge.
Yes, so the Sycamore Ridge development is the proposed housing development at the corner of Burnett and Leffel Lane. It's a 258 home development. This TIF is set up exactly like the Bridgewater, so it would be a hybrid type TIF. So in the first 10 years, 75% of those funds would go into the TIF revenue fund and 25% would go outside of that to those taxing jurisdictions or subdivisions. And then for the remaining 20 years, it would be a non-school revenue TIF, where all the non-school revenues would go into the TIF fund. The schools would still receive their total 100% of allocation of that new property tax. And again, as in the presentation it stated, this is on new valuation that would go into the TIF. So the existing property taxes that the taxing subdivisions are already receiving, they will continue to collect.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments on first readings? Clerk will proceed with second readings.
To amend ordinance number 9190 passed March 12, 1991, and commonly known as the Codified Ordinances of the City of Springfield, Ohio, by repealing and replacing existing Chapter 135 with a new Chapter 135 entitled Department of Human Resources, and repealing and replacing certain sections of Chapters 185, 188, and 189.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission?
As I recall, what we're doing here is essentially changing the name of what was the Personnel Department to the Department of Human Resources.
Yes, that is correct, Commissioners.
That makes some sense. Thank you.
In the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing a contribution to Springfield Promise Neighborhood in the amount of $1,000 to support the South Side and Bloom Garden Tour.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
I have to abstain because I have a direct conflict of interest on this item. My daughter is being paid a stipend for graphic artwork she is doing in connection with the South Side in Bloom Garden Tour.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing an expenditure to assist property owners on Ogden Road and East National Road to attach their properties to a new water service on the recently installed 24-inch Eastern Pressure District water main to enable the city to abandon the existing 6-inch water line that currently serves these properties.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Confirming purchases and the obtaining of services for the city and providing for payments therefor, and declaring it an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? The audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Providing for supplemental appropriations within various funds and declaring it an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions, comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with the Clark County Historical Society to provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $50,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement, and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements, and declaring it an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with the Greater Springfield Convention and Visitors Bureau to provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $40,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under subrecipient funding agreement, and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements, and declaring it an emergency therein.
I'll move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Manager, would you just quickly tell us what an ARPA is?
Yeah, so commissioners, that's the American Rescue Plan Act that we received money from the federal government as it related to COVID relief. And one of the items specified in there was to help arts and cultural institutions within your community rebound, because obviously they were not able to have visitors attend and patrons. And so this allows us to help support those cultural and art institutions within our community.
Anybody else? Call the roll.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with Friends of the Hartman Rock Garden to provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $10,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement, and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements, and declaring it an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with Gammon House Incorporated to provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $10,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement, and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements, and declaring it an emergency therein.
I'll move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Phillips? Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with Ohio Performing Arts Institute. Provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $20,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrada?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Here. Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with the Springfield Foundation to provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $40,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrada?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with Springfield Museum of Art, provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $60,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estrada?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with Springfield Symphony Orchestra, provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $50,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrada?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA subrecipient agreement with the Westcott House Foundation, provide ARPA funding to support art, culture, and tourism programs within Springfield for an amount not to exceed $40,000. Authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance to perform all acts and execute all documents they consider necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under said subrecipient funding agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
So
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission?
Yeah, I'd like to ask the city manager just to speak a little bit. We've been kind of a benevolent group of votes we've just done, but there's various funds and there's also different amounts that have been kind of voted on here. Can you explain that a little bit and what that process was?
Yeah, so we had an application process where we received 9 applications, and we did recommend all 9 to receive an award. The award amount is based off of the individual organization's total annual revenue from the prior year. So that way, it put them into a category, and then with a max award of $60,000.
And these were basically, these were the amounts that were asked for within their application.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? That concludes the ARPA stuff. Clerk, call the
Let's
roll.
buy some lawnmowers now.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrada?
yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the purchase of one Leeboy 7000C asphalt truck paver from the McClinton Company for an amount not to exceed $138,738.20. plus trade-in credit of $8,000 for a net purchase amount not to exceed $130,738.20 through Sourcewell pursuant to the Sourcewell Contract Purchasing Cooperative Program in accordance with the provisions of Section 9.48 of the Ohio Revised Code and declaring an emergency therein.
So moved.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the Snyder Park Tennis Court asphalt removal and replacement project from Fisher Tracks Incorporated for an amount not to exceed $466,042 through Buy Board pursuant to the Buy Board National Purchasing Cooperative Program in accordance with the provisions of Section 9.48 of the Ohio Revised Code and declaring an emergency therein.
Move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded.
Yeah, I have a
Leanne,
comment.
is there a repurpose of this particular facility, or is it all going to be tennis court?
Leanne, can you please name and address for the record too as well?
There will actually be 3 tennis courts and 8 pickleball courts, which has been a long coming project. So
Yes, it
lots
has.
of people are very excited with this today.
Leanne,
Don't ask.
could you
She's going to ask.
advise some of the people in the community exactly what pickleball is? Because I'm so unsure.
Okay, pickleball is the
already
fastest
know.
growing sport in the United States.
Okay.
Mainly played by seniors.
Okay.
But it's short court tennis with paddles and wiffle ball type balls. So
Got it.
it's slower, well, it could be faster paced, but it's easier on the knees and joints.
Absolutely. So it sounds like something I should be into as a
Yes.
Uh,
We'll have
middle-aged-
lessons
Or considering.
for you.
yes.
Like I
And
did.
while you're right there, what's the time frame?
Well, we don't know that yet. We know that once it's approved, they will put it on their construction calendar. So hopefully as soon as possible. And
Thank you.
I have to share this because I just thought of it. Part of the money that was given was in memory of my mom, and you're approving this on her, what would have been her 75th birthday. So
Oh.
she's probably really excited too. So thank you.
We haven't voted on it yet.
But thank you for sharing
I'm
that.
hoping that that will sway your vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the forgiveness of certain interest and other charges and release of the city's mortgage with the Neighborhood Housing Partnership of Greater Springfield Incorporated on the Community Gardens Phase 2 project to enhance the availability of affordable senior housing in Springfield and declaring it an emergency therein.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission?
I was wondering if you might give us a little more information about this. Go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner. So this is related to Neighborhood Housing Partnerships Community Gardens Project, which is a senior living project on the southeast side of our community, familiar with the former community hospital site. We had provided a mortgage on Phase 2 property to assist really with the Phase 1 project. And so this loan is being forgiven as a part to help facilitate the Phase 2 development now, which will include additional housing units, not only on the rest of the community hospital site, but also the former Schaefer school site.
Need the housing.
Anyone else? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a renewal contract with Superior Dental Incorporated, provide for dental insurance coverage for city employees for the period July 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2024, authorizing the expenditures related thereto, finding a real and present emergency pursuant to Section 145.02 of the city's codified ordinances, and declaring it an emergency therein.
Move.
Second.
So this covers the insurance, but we still get to go to our own dentist, right?
Yes.
Anyone else? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Dr. Estra?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city to retain membership in the Ohio Benefits Cooperative Incorporated, OBC, Regional Council of Government to participate in its OBC Medical Purchasing Cooperative, and authorizing the city manager, law director, and director of finance and personnel director to do all things necessary for compliance with OBC bylaws and the Jefferson Health Plan Agreement, JHP, all to provide medical and prescription drug coverage benefits for the city's employees, authorizing expenditures necessary to fulfill the city's obligations under the said bylaws and JHP agreement, and declaring an emergency therein.
To adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission? From the audience? Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes?
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Clark State College to provide supplemental police services. Authorizing the city manager, director of finance, law director, and chief of police to do all things necessary and execute all documents they deem necessary to implement said agreement and to comply with all relevant local, state, and federal legal requirements and declaring an emergency therein.
Move.
Second.
And moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission?
Is this in addition, Chief, to security that Clark State has, so we're simply supplementing their security staff?
Good evening, Commissioner. This just continues the arrangements we already have with Clark State, where we have 2 officers that are assigned to the campus. We renew it usually annually, and it just reflects some of the cost increases for the labor, but in a sense, it basically just continues.
Very good. Thank you.
Anyone else? Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes?
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Strand Associates Incorporated for preliminary and detailed design services for the chemical storage and feed building improvements project at the water treatment plant for an amount not to exceed $195,000 and declaring an emergency therein.
So move.
Second.
And moved and second. Questions or comments from commission? From the audience? Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes?
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Authorizing the fiscal officer to create a super blanket purchase order as permitted by the Ohio Revised Code 5705.4103 and declaring an emergency therein.
Move to adopt.
Second.
And moved and seconded. Questions or comments from the commission?
Yeah, Brian, do you want to explain this a little bit?
I'll actually ask Mark to
Mark.
do that.
Money Mark?
Sure, Commissioner, I'd be happy to. What the super blanket is it's a administrative tool provided by the state of Ohio that allows us in certain instances to create a purchase order, which is called the super blanket. Normally, our blanket purchase orders are $25,000 less. This allows us for very specific items to create a super blanket in an amount of what you've approved for appropriation. We're kind of just dipping our toe in the water here with the 3 that we've asked you to approve tonight. And part of the reason for this is the changing environment where we are not able to enter into contract for many of our commodity type items for longer than 3 months at a time. So we've chosen these because these were kind of what I'll call no-brainers for AvFuel for the FBO that recently approved for some training at Clark State and for notices that are sent out by the clerk of court. But we probably will come back to you with some additional ones where we are unable to secure contract for an extended period of time. But this is just to ease the administrative burden on the staff, and it does not in any way avoid the competitive process. We have to go out and get quotes from at least 3 vendors so that we can continue on with the competitive process.
Thank you.
Anything else? Clerk will call the roll.
Dr. Estrop?
Yes?
Ms. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes, that concludes our agenda. Are there other items to come before us, commissioners? Yes,
First of all, I want to compliment Mrs. Pierce. If you had one more authorizing the city manager to enter into an ARPA sub-agreement, you must be dreaming of that at night right now. So thank you very much. Great job. I also wanted to announce publicly, I'm very pleased to share with you that the U.S. EPA and the United States Department of Justice have signed off on the consent decree that affects the Tremont City barrel fill. So it is now on its way to the judge for his or her review. Brian just checked tonight. The comment period has not started at this point, but we expect it to start. There's a 30-day comment period that once the judge determines when it starts, people can comment on the consent decree. But very clear, this would not have happened without the support of many people and many institutions in this community. It just wouldn't have happened. It took the EPA, US EPA, 4 years to do the right thing, but they finally done it. That doesn't mean we can relax. We must remain vigilant, because now the hard work of the consent decree before the judge starts, and then the very difficult task of designing how to remediate and take care of those 51,500 barrels of waste that are in that barrel fill. Now, as part of that, I'm also pleased, Mrs. Allen, we have now employed a firm that specializes in environmental law. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you share with us who that is, please?
Sure. The firm's name is McMahon Indigolis, LLP.
And they specialize in environmental law.
They exclusively deal with environmental law.
Okay, good. We will remain vigilant. We obviously will have this new law firm take a look at the consent decree to make sure it has everything that we were told by the EPA in it. I also personally will use the opportunity to comment. I asked 2 questions at our public meeting in April. Why did it take the US EPA 4 years? And why didn't they follow their own written, established policies, procedures, and timelines were established by the United States Department of Environmental Protection Agency? I have received no answer.
it's been more than 20 years.
No, it's 40 years. 40 years. 40 years. But I asked those 2 questions, no answer.
No, you're not.
So I'm going to put that comment in the court paper. And we'll see if the court has any better luck getting an answer than we have. By the way, I'm also made aware that our 2 senators, Senator Brown and Senator Portman, are co-authoring a letter to the US EPA asking them the same 2 questions. Thank you very much.
Else? Name, address for the record?
Casey Lee, 363 Titus Road, Springfield, Ohio. Commissioners, thank you for letting me address you tonight. A few weeks ago, I came to the commission meeting. We talked a little bit about the annexation of the properties over on the east edge of town, specifically from Bird Road back to Titus Road. Brian, this is kind of more directed maybe to you and to the commissioners, but a couple things I wanted to just touch base with you on is I wanted to find out for sure if we look through the CETA agreement, the CETA agreement literally does not address anything as it relates to single-family dwelling homes. And I'm just asking the question of if this agreement with the township and with the city and the annexation of that, if that is what you guys are looking at doing for that property back there on the east side. And obviously, we talked a little bit about TIFs tonight. My question about the TIFs is I understand the reasoning behind it. However, it's almost like the city is paying that developer to not only develop the area, but they're also getting paid by the residents who are buying the properties that are in the area that they're developing. So it's kind of like a double dipping, if you will, I think. So my question is I think that the township trustees, and I think that they've already maybe talked to some of you as well, is trying to get together with you to kind of revisit this CETA agreement. As I read through it, I mean, I'm not a lawyer by any means at all, but I do believe that agreement, if that is what the CETA agreement states, that does not have anything to do with residential homes that are being built back.
So the CETA agreement addressed development as a whole. And CETA was put in place at a time where annexation rules in the state of Ohio were causing townships to shrink overall. And so the CETA agreement was kind of a pretty advanced document at its time. We were the first CETA adopted in Ohio, which allowed the township to not shrink, but development to still occur, and the township to not lose their tax base, their property tax base. The state of Ohio did change shortly, probably 5-6 years after that, annexation rules where there was an annexation process where those properties could go through annexation but not detach from the township. So it kind of addressed the main issue dealt with through CETA. Now, what CETA did, again, it was about general development, but what it provided to the township was 12.5% of the income tax generated from the commercial industrial development that occurred within CETA, which has happened. And that income tax that was paid was a service payment to the township for the services that the township, Springfield Township, was to provide in any of that annexed territory within CETA, regardless of whether it was residential and or commercial industrial. And so it lays that out pretty clearly, again, that the revenue generated through the industrial commercial development within the CETA territory generates more than enough revenue to cover the services that the township is asked to provide as part of that CETA arrangement or CETA document. So one of the questions would be what has been done with the CETA revenue that has been generated and paid to as a service payment to the township to date. Because again, it was intended as a service payment for the services that the township was to provide within that CETA territory, again, whether it was residential development or commercial industrial. Now, as far as the TIF is concerned, as it relates to the Melody Drive-In development, at this point in time, the developer has not asked for any type of TIF arrangement. Doesn't mean that they're not going to, but at this point in time, they have not asked commission to consider or even have asked staff to consider any type of proposal like was discussed in the work session where they show you the dollars and cents of a project. What I will say, generally, what we're finding with these TIFs, and TIFs are fairly new to us as a community as well, is that the public infrastructure costs, which are associated with the development to bring that type of development, whether commercial, industrial, or residential, there's a gap in the ability of the developer to develop the property and keep a price point, specifically in these instances of residential development or residential homes, at a manageable cost for people to afford. And so without the TIF revenues helping offset the public infrastructure costs, roads, utilities, et cetera, these projects would find themselves in a huge gap to be able to make them work and move forward. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It does answer it, but at the same time, and then one other question I had to address is the dual citizenship of these residents that are going to be moving into these areas. As we know, Moorfield Township, those residents do not vote for city commissioners, and they vote for all the levies and everything out in Moorfield Township. To me, I think that it's most likely if they're living in that Springfield Township area, even though it is annexed into the city, that they should have one decision, because what's going to end up happening is Springfield Township Fire and EMS and that levy, people who are living there, they're going to end up voting a no on it, because they're going to have Springfield Fire Rescue, who Brian's here, and Chief Smith, and I appreciate all your efforts, not taking anything away, because I know you guys do a great job, but it's just the idea is I think that there's going to be a lot of negative voting, and as we all know, voting, there might be 1,200 people, 1,500 residents that come from that could seriously sway an election on a fire and EMS levy in Springfield Township.
Well, and I understand your point of that dual citizenship. Understand that's not a city of Springfield. That's a state of Ohio, how they've
Right,
set up
but
annexations.
Can't that be revised somehow?
Well, at the state house, they could decide to revise that, but not at the city level.
But I mean, is that something that we have to do here in Springfield to take it over there, or what?
You can reach out to your
I
state.
mean, that's the township. This is
Yeah.
something, so what you're saying, let's just say that would happen. It's not like we have annexed that property, so all those residents would be city residents, not township residents. Let's just say, that's not happening. So that would take away from township revenue. So what I'm saying is what you're proposing, or what you're maybe hypothetically saying, I don't know if the township would be excited about that, because then that revenue would be taken from the township, which goes back to the original question about CETA. And when the mayor and other community leaders were involved with putting CETA together, it was to create a collaboration to make these developments happen. State law changes just a few years after that makes CETA more of a was important than is important. CETA is more developed, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, CETA is more in place to take care of properties that are within these areas, not to continue to develop them. So what we're saying as a city, or excuse me, what I'm saying and what I said in the paper is we most likely don't feel the CETA is important, because we're willing to take care of those areas ourselves, willing and able, have the staff, have the equipment to do that, which could in turn cut red tape for those new residents in those developments, which would help them. But what you're proposing, what you're saying about this dual citizenship would take revenue from, if the state changed that, then the townships would actually shrink, which is what they're not interested in doing.
No,
So-
they
so
don't. Springfield
they don't
Township
want to
does not
shrink, they don't
get
want to
out of
lose
the CETA
revenue.
agreement. They don't want to get away from the CETA agreement. But
Right, and I understand that, and here's why. Because there is a ton of money going into the Springfield Township budget, as said in the paper by one of the trustees. It goes into the general fund. But if that is used for the upkeep of all those areas that have been annexed, we would like to know and make sure that all that money was used for exactly what it was used for. If not, we're willing to jump in and take care of it.
I totally agree, Rob. The thing I'm concerned about is if there's a lot of money there, the Springfield Township, that you guys are questioning what it is.
We're not questioning, we're paying.
Right,
We're
I
paying
know.
it into the township. We want to make sure if it's supposed to be used to clean up brush, to do snow repair, to do road repair, we want to make sure that all of that money was used for it. If not, that I agree with Mr. Foley. Let's look at the CETA agreement, make sure it's accurate.
I totally agree. So I think that there should be a meeting of some sort of minds about the seed agreement as far
There
as modification to it or justifying or.
I'll weigh in. I think we should do away with it. I
Yeah,
think it's
I don't know about
outlived its
modify.
time.
Do away
And
with
I
it, all
think
right.
we just do away with it, be done with it. It's going to cut all this back and forth. And if somebody wants to have their property annexed to the city, so be it. If they don't,
And that's already in
so
place.
be it. I mean, and we won't have any of this revenue sharing or any of that stuff. As far as I'm concerned, do away with CETA. I think it's lived its time and be done with it. And then the township can do whatever they want to do.
So, but the idea, all those monies, sorry, Warren, I know this is taking a while, but all those monies, it should be a wash. So if we're, how many, 400 and some $1,000 last year?
Last year, they were paid just under $500,000.
Just under 500,000. So if they're not providing those services in 23, 4, or 5, then it should be a wash, because it shouldn't affect their budget at all, because they're providing that, we believe they're providing that amount of services to those areas. If they're not, if that's a loss to them, then it's an overpayment in a way.
Well,
Does that make
I
sense?
can't
Can I
speak on
say a
their, I
word?
can't speak on their behalf, but. all
No,
I
I'm
know
just
is-
saying, and I know that this will be heard. So you brought up TIF. which we understand we wanted you to. You brought up CETA. We want to address that. You brought up dual citizenship as a good citizen. We want to talk about that to make sure there are at least opinions and facts coming from the commission and not just kind of ambiguous
And
statements.
I think that if that meeting ever does come about, I think it should be a public meeting. And I think the city, the commissioners and the township trustees should be involved with it, is what I think. And the residents of the area. And I did have one other question, and I'll wrap up.
Could I
Mayor.
just say a
Hang on,
word?
the mayor.
Yes.
I was involved in negotiating that. We thought we got the short end of the stick, to be honest with you, but we made that compromise in order to have peace. Don't believe the city was sticking it to the township or anyone else out there. They got a pretty good deal out of it. That's all I want to say.
I'm not saying that the city of Springfield's sticking to anybody, Mayor, but all I know is I moved out to the Springfield Township 22 years ago. Love the township, love the city of Springfield. Been here 56 years.
Right.
You knew my father. I love Springfield. But what I'm saying is, it just seems like there's so much land grabbing going on right now in the city. I mean, it really. I mean, and I'm not saying
AC,
this.
let's time out on land grab.
Well, I'm
let's
just-
just
okay.
no, let's
what-
just bring that. You bring
Let
that.
him talk, okay?
You bring that statement
My
up.
job is to keep peace here. Let him talk.
You bring land
Your
grab
turn.
up. When you
Please.
bring land grab up, it says a whole lot of things. Land grab has not happened. Owners of private property have asked city for annexation. Owner has a right to do that based on the state of Ohio law. When owner asks that, city obliges. Required by law. We are not land grabbing. So when you throw terms like that, Casey, and you're a good man, but that makes the public think things are happening that are not. So I gotta correct you on that.
Okay, and I'm sorry for saying land grabbing,
Yeah.
because I didn't mean to speak that.
I know you
way,
didn't.
but
I just
did
wanna make sure
ask
it's
one
corrected.
question. What is the actual future plans for the residents on Titus Road from 40 down to the other end of Titus Road? Is that something that you guys are going to want everyone to be annexed into the
The
city?
CETA agreement protects against that. It allows those residents access to utilities without having to annex into the city.
Right.
That was a main point of CETA, was existing residential properties built prior to CETA could access our utilities without annexing. So it actually protects you.
In place.
So what happens though when it does when that does take all those residents are annexed in the city and people choose not to do that?
You do not have to choose
Right, I
as a
understand
resident
that. I understand
to
that.
annex.
But what I'm saying is there going to be somewhere down the road where they're going to come back and say, well, you need to be tied into the city water, city sewer.
I can't project that. That's a health department
Right, that's what I'm
determination.
saying. That's where
The
I'm
health
getting to.
department determines if your property can get either a new septic on the existing property, or if they feel you need to tie into a public water system. But what CETA does protect is if the health department comes and says, yes, you need to connect into public utilities, the CETA agreement protects you as an existing resident prior to CETA. It allows you to connect to those public utilities without having to annex.
But at the time of the annexation for that new addition to take place, if we object out or we opt out of it, then it falls on us after that, correct?
I guess falls on you as.
If we do not annex into the city at the time when the other addition comes on.
Has nothing to do with that.
No, but I'm saying, would that mean that me being a homeowner and I choose not to be a part of the city as far as annex, and then all of a sudden the health department comes out and says, oh, well, your well's not up to code, then does that mean it falls back on me to have to pay to get?
As long as
connected
CETA is in place, you do not have to annex into the city. And you could still connect to those public utilities.
But you will pay.
That's what I'm saying.
But you would pay anyway. A private property owner has to pay to connect to the utilities, not,
Right.
we don't. And again, we're not forcing individual properties to connect to our
It's
utilities.
not a city requirement.
The health department has rules governed by the state that if you're within so many feet of a public utility system, specifically on the sewer side, because a lot of these acre and a half lots do not have the capacity to add an additional septic or a new septic system, they are required to connect to a public sewer system. But you would not have to annex into the city. But the health department can force you to connect to a public utility system if it is within a financial reasonable term for that property owner to connect.
Casey, we thought we were leaving folks like you with choices to make that you got to make, not us. We didn't think we were forcing you to do anything. And quite honestly, there were a lot of people who thought the city got taken on that deal. That's the real truth. But we thought it was good for the community to move it forward.
Because it gave township residents the choice.
Right.
At the time.
And again, I want to emphasize to Rob's point about land grab, Ohio Revised Code, the state of Ohio allows private property owners to make a decision on whether they want to annex or not. And so these developments that are happening, the Melody development, the developer has worked with that private property owner that owns that property, and that private property owner has given that developer the permission to annex into the city. That is a private property decision. We didn't say, private property owner, you have to annex into the city. Now, if they wanted access to new utilities for a development, yes, they need to annex into the city, but that is a private property decision to, one, develop the property, and two, to get access to public utilities that we provide.
One more question. Is there a plan of tying a street to come off of the new addition onto Titus Road?
I actually do not believe that the developer has shown in his plan development that a access point onto Titus. They show all their access points off of 40.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have one question. Did you miss this, Jim?
Yeah.
Jim Bodemiller's with us this evening. He used to be city manager, and he's probably thinking right now, man, I'm glad I got rid of that job. Right?
Okay.
Welcome. Anybody else? Anybody want to adjourn the meeting?
I move that we go into executive session for personnel appointment.
Is there a second? Somebody's got
Is there
to
a
second the
second?
motion. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Who seconded that motion? Thank you.
Kevin.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Phillips? Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Estrad?
Yes?
Mr. Copeland?
Yes. The meeting is adjourned, and we will not come back into this session after the